guys, this is Preston again with White Metal Games.
I'm Danny.
And we're bringing you our second installment on Blood Bowl Training Camp today. This time, now that we've got all of our teams and our boards, our dice, everything we need to play the game, we're going to take a step back before we get onto the pitch itself, and we're going to just kind of review over the basic rules and go over how those interact with each other, what they mean for each player on the pitch. So, standard Blood Bowl player, there's 4 stats involved usually. This doesn't have to go with skills or anything like that. Those are extra, which we'll cover in a later video. But the 4 main stats are going to be...
Movement. So MA, that's the movement. So I'll just put a miniature here. So that lets you know how many spaces that your player can move each turn. So that you can go in any direction. So, for example, you could go, that's 1. You can go sideways, diagonal, any square around that player. So that's how many movement each player can activate and move.
Yep. The next stat is strength. That's the ST stat. And that represents both how physically strong and tough the miniature is. And that comes into course when you're throwing blocks on your opponent. And so we can do a quick demonstration here. Let's say that you have a Chaos Warrior who is typically strength 4, and they're going up against a Ogre who is typically strength 5. The way that strength interacts with each other on the Blood Bowl pitch is that you compare your strength to the strength of the person that you're going against. So let's say we have an Ogre and a Minotaur facing off against each other here, and the Ogre wishes to throw a block on the Minotaur. Now both the Ogre and the Minotaur are both strength 5, so that means they're equal strength, and that means that you get to roll 1 of the block dice against it. Now we'll talk a little bit about what these different symbols on the block dice means. The most common one to roll is the push result. That means you just get to push them back in one of 3 directions. You can push them back straight back or diagonally backwards in either direction if you roll that result. If you roll the defender down result, which just looks like a POW explosion, that's the best result you can roll, and that means you get to push the enemy back as well as knock them over, and you can roll on their injury or to see if you break their armor. And so if you roll that, you would push them back and they would get knocked over, and then you would roll the dice to see if they break their armor. And we'll talk about that once we get to the 4th stat involving players, which is the armor value stat. So, but let's say if the Ogre is going up against somebody who's less strength than him, like a Chaos Warrior. So Chaos Warriors are typically strength 4, and with Ogres being strength 5, they're actually 2 strength, they're actually greater strength than the Chaos Warrior. So if you're at least 1 greater strength than your enemy, you get to roll 2 dice, and so that significantly improves your odds of pushing over the enemy. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these other results in the dice. So as opposed to the pushback and the defender gets knocked down result, you also have the skull result, which is attacker gets knocked down. That's the worst one you can roll. That means that you yourself would fall over. Instead, you failed miserably at blocking the enemy. Another result is almost as bad, which is the both down result, and that's similar, but instead both of you guys get knocked down.
And depending on your skills that you have, you might be able to negate this, but most players right off the bat don't have this skill, so you would have both go down.
Yep, and then the last result on the dice is the defender stumbles result, and a lot of new players have a hard time distinguishing this result from the defender down result, which is just the POW without the exclamation point in the center. They basically do the same thing for all intents and purposes until you start involving skills that particular players would have.
For example, I think your
for example, in specific, the Snotlings on the Ogre team have the dodge skill, and what the dodge skill allows you to do is to treat this result as just a pushback, so that allows you a little bit more survivability.
Yeah, so it would turn into this instead.
Yeah, and so, but we'll get into more of those in-depth skill usages in later videos. For now, we're just talking about how stats interact with each other.
So as a recap, if your opponent is stronger than you, you're rolling 2 dice and they pick.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, the Chaos Warrior wanted to attack the Ogre instead of the Ogre attacking the Chaos Warrior. You'd still roll 2 dice, but since you have at least 1 strength less than your opponent can pick the result on the dice roll. And so that makes it a little bit more risky for you too, because an important thing to realize with Blood Bowl is that if any of your players get knocked down during your turn immediately ends. So that's a very important thing to distinguish, to note in Blood Bowl, and it becomes key when it comes to strategies on the pitch.
And if you're more than double the strength, you get 3 dice and pick.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, we have the Minotaur from the Chaos team going up against one of these weak little Snotlings. The Snotlings are only strength 1, and so they are completely outmatched by the Minotaur. So the Minotaur, we get to roll 3 dice on the Snotling, and so you have a very high chance of doing some damage there. So the next stat we'll take a look at is going to be the agility stat, which is the AG stat.
And what agility is basically what you need for any kind of action other than blocking. So dodging or catching a ball or throwing the ball.
Yeah, whenever you try to do one of these actions, you have to roll a single d6, and you have to exceed a certain number depending on how agile your player is. The higher your agility score, the easier that dice roll is going to be for you. So for example, the Snotlings, their agility 3, so are the Beastmen. That's kind of a standard number in Blood Bowl. 3 is kind of a standard stat as far as strength and agility goes. And so if the Snotling wanted to dodge away from the Beastman, I would have to roll a 3+ on a 2d6, or on a 1d6. I would have to roll a 3+ on 1d6 to succeed in the dodge roll there. Similarly, if I was trying to pick up a ball with the Snotling, he would also have to roll a 3+ in order to pick up the ball. And another important thing to note is that if you fail to pick up the ball, or if you drop the ball or from the ball during any point in your turn, then your turn immediately ends.
So when you're looking at dice, we'll make a real quick reference. So a 1 is always a fail. A 6 is always a pass. Now let's say your agility is 6. That means you'd have to roll anything higher than a 1. If you had an agility 5, you'd have to roll a 2 or higher. So it would go back, so then agility 3, you'd need a 4, and then the exact opposite. If you have agility 4, you need a 3, and then a 5, you need a 2, or if you had agility 2, you need a 5. So if you look at the dice from one extreme to the other, they kind of switch.
Yep, and there's a table in the rule book that you can reference. After agility, the next stat is going to be AV, which stands for armor value, and that determines how physically tough your character is, how hard it is for them to hurt, and how thick their armor is. So the way that this stat works is whenever your player falls down or gets knocked down on the pitch, the enemy will roll 2d6, and they'll roll 2d6 and attempt to exceed your armor value. And if they do so, that means they break your armor, and they'll get to roll another 2d6 on the injury table. And all these tables can be found in the rule book to see what happens to the player. They can either be stunned, knocked out, or hurt even worse than that. So.
And to note, anytime you're rolling for dice on armor, you always have to beat it. Matching does not do anything. You have to beat it.
Greater than the armor value.
And it doesn't matter if it's a block. Anytime any player is on the ground, except for like a wrestle, you have to roll armor.
Yep. So other than that, to recap on the main stats, we've got movement allowance, which dictates how many squares your player can move. We have strength, which determines how strong and tough they are when you're doing blocking actions. We have agility, which determines how good they are at picking up the ball and dodging and doing agile things like that. And we also have armor value, which is how tough their armor is and how resilient they are from taking damage. Alright guys, so those are the basic stats for your Blood Bowl players. Next time we're going to be taking a look at how those stats actually interact with each other when you're playing a game of Blood Bowl. So we're actually going to set up a little practice match in our next video and go through some of the nitty-gritty stuff to kind of like re-cement this stuff for you and help you learn the game. So until next time, we'll see you next time.